What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we're joined by Rylan Stiles from Locked On Thunder, as the Thunder are in control of not one, not two, not three, but four picks in this year's NBA draft. What is the Thunder draft strategy? Is Chet Holmgren a lock for the Thunder at number 2, or could they surprise by going with somebody like Paolo Banchero or a Jaden Ivey? Is it possible for the Thunder to trade down or trade up using any number of their picks in this year's draft? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting stats and info. Find the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's finals odds, the NHL hockey conference finals, Major League Baseball, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA, UFC, and even boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, the NBA draft, and more. And speaking of the NBA draft, right now, you can go to BetOnline to see who is the odds-on favorite to be the number 1 overall selection in this year's NBA draft. Right now, it's Jabari Smith Jr. at minus 225 to be the number 1 pick. You got Chet Holmgren at plus 170. And then Paolo Banchero at plus 1,000 to go number 1 overall. So for that and more, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action available to you. Bet online. It's where the game starts. Joining us now is Rylan Stiles from Locked On Thunder. You can follow on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Now, Rylan, in addition to just the copious number of future first-round draft picks that Sam Presti has amassed, during his tenure as the Thunder general manager, the Thunder have 4 picks in this year's upcoming draft: 2, 12, 30, and 34. We're going to focus on pick number 2 right here from the jump. Right now, the common consensus is Jabari and Chet in some order, 1 and 2, although most of the signs are pointing towards Jabari at number 1. Is it a lock for Chet Holmgren to be the Thunder selection at number 2, or is there an argument for another prospect like a Paolo Banchero or a Jaden Ivey if you're the Thunder at pick number 2?
Yeah, it's hard to call anything a lock with Sam Presti. You know that he loves to throw these curveballs, but it does feel like whoever's left of Jabari Smith Jr. and Chet Holmgren will be a member of the Thunder on draft night after Orlando's off the clock.
And at this point, I mean, if you had your pick of the 2, which unfortunately the Thunder aren't in that position, right? It almost makes things really easy if you're the Thunder, right? Because you're just like, all right, Jabari, Chet, whoever's left, you take the second guy and you're pretty much happy with it, right?
Yeah, I think that there's really no wrong answer. For me, Jabari Smith Jr. is number 1 on my board. I think that he just fits seamlessly with what the Thunder are trying to do, with his defense that's so versatile. Plus, he feels that shooting need and can space the floor for Josh Giddey's playmaking, and SGA, who's elite at driving and kicking, can set him up from the 3-point line. With Chet Holmgren, you get more of an upside, but also, of course, a much lower floor if things don't go the way they're supposed to at Chet Holmgren. But I don't think you can go wrong with either one of them. They're both number 1, number 2 on my board. So whatever Sam Presti decides is going to be good enough for me.
Well, the margin for, difference as far as the talent in these top 3 prospects might be, pretty thin depending on who you ask. Are there any potential like attractive scenarios in your mind in which the Thunder could potentially trade up to that number 1 overall selection? Is there anything of value that you think the Thunder would be willing to part with to be able to have their choice of Jabari versus Chet, or potentially even trade down from that number 2 spot and maybe recoup an additional asset for that number 2 overall pick?
Yeah, if I had to bet right now, I think that the Thunder are just going to stay put at 2. It's very boring. I know it's very easy to kind of make up these scenarios and put these scenarios out there because you can just fall back on the crutch of Sam Presti's a wild man and he loves first-round picks. And if he trades back, it all makes sense because Sam Presti's unpredictable. But in reality, I do think that the Thunder are just going to stay put at 2 and make things easy. I'm not sure that they'd even be looking to trade up, honestly. I think that they feel very comfortable with anything that Orlando does at 1. No matter if they take Walker Kessler or Paolo Banchero or Chet Holmgren or Jabari Smith Jr., no matter what they do, even if it's a complete disaster like Walker Kessler would have been, they're going to be okay with it in OKC. So I just don't see them giving up assets to move up to number 1. And I also don't necessarily buy into the smoke, although moving back to 4 for Jaden Ivey, if that's truly Sam Presti's guy, that makes a lot more sense to me than moving up. So if anything, you might move back, but I think that ultimately the Thunder stay at 2.
Shout out to Richard Stamen, one of our amazing in-house Locked On draft experts. You got to check out the Locked On Big Board podcast, but he is a huge fan of Walker Kessler, of course. Now, when we look at the rest of the selection that the Thunder have, Riley, you got 12, 30, and 34. How aggressive should we expect Sam Presti to be in possibly, packaging those picks together maybe and trying to trade a little bit further up in the draft, to get one of those other, maybe because that 12 pick, right? It's kind of like just on the cusp of where some of those tier 2 prospects may fall, kind of going off the board a little bit earlier before that, 12th pick is on the board. And if that's the case, if you think, Presti would be aggressive, who are some of the teams that, make sense as possible trade partners for the Thunder to maybe package up some of those draft picks for?
So the Thunder trade market's very interesting to me because I feel like the Thunder just can't be leveraged into doing anything. The big kind of worry right now for people who don't cover the team is just, how can you make 4 roster spots? How can you bring in 4 rookies? Well, if the Thunder see value at all 4 picks, they're going to be very comfortable drafting 4 players. There's very easy guys to get rid of, both contractually and just talent-wise. I mean, you can't spend the whole year saying the Thunder are the black eye league and then act like they can't make up 4 roster spots. So they're going to be comfortable taking all 4 picks if they need to. However, there's a lot of scenarios that I see them trading up. I think that trading up from 12 really depends on Shaden Sharp's situation. If he falls to 8, 9, 10, especially to Washington, if he can fall to that 10 range and you've only got to move up that slot from 12 to 10, you give up, the 12th pick, you give up Washington's pick the Thunder own to make them more flexible, and then maybe even throw in a Mitchie who wants to come over from the Euro Leagues and is kind of a Finals MVP and everything from overseas. Maybe that gets it down to move up a couple spots to get Shaden Sharp. But the reality is, like I said, the leverage portion of it, roster spots wise, at 12, there's just too many names, and those names are not separated by such a wide margin to where it wouldn't shock me to see Johnny Davis registered at 12 on some people's boards, but others be, the 7th best prospect in this draft, to where people like that are going to have to fall to 12 because there's just too many good names that you want to put out there, like an AJ Griffin, a Jalen Duren, a Johnny Davis, a Malachi Branham. They all can't be rising and then nobody falls to 12. So somebody good's going to be at 12. I think that it comes down to if Sam Presti's guys falling, which it seems like that might be Shaden Sharp, who Jonathan Givony of ESPN put out that the Thunder have studied Shaden Sharp more than any other team in the NBA, and that Shaden Sharp's camp wants to be in OKC, which is a big deal for a small market. So if he starts to fall, then I think the Thunder will be very aggressive in going up there and trying to get him.
Shaden Sharp falling to 12 might be a bit of a stretch. Now, if he falls just far enough to where he's within trade range for the Thunder, that could be a really interesting scenario for them. But Rylan, if they do hold on to that 12th pick, maybe Shaden Sharp doesn't fall all the way to 12. Who's the name that you want to see on the board more than any other when the Thunder are on the clock with pick 12, if they keep that selection?
I really like the idea of Johnny Davis if he's there. I think that he just adds a element of offense that the Thunder don't necessarily have right now besides SGA. SGA is really the only guy who can go get a bucket and kind of put the offense on his back in isolation, and that's great, and he's excellent at it, but nobody else on this roster can truly go get you a bucket besides Trey Mann off the bench. So adding just a third guy who can create his own offense and create it by scoring points and not by setting others up the way Josh Giddey does would be a big deal to me, would be very appealing to me in Johnny Davis, because then, of course, you just can get more offense from a bucket getter and take pressure off of Shae a bit. So Johnny Davis being there at 12 would be awesome. AJ Griffin, if he falls, would be awesome. If he falls, whatever the reason would be, medicals, defense, whatever. I love AJ Griffin. And then there's always going to be a subsection of people that want to see Chet Holmgren paired with Jalen Duren, and the Thunder prioritize defense, and that'd be a heck of a young defensive team right there.
That would be a front court for the ages for certain. Now, Rylan, when you look at, you mentioned this momentarily, ago, just talking about the fact that, the Thunder are a team that, are poised to potentially bring in 4 rookies, right, with this year's draft. And this is a team that you look at their roster to start last year, they had 2/3 of their roster were guys with 2 or less years of experience in the NBA, 10 guys, across the board. Is this a team that's almost forced to be in a position where they're about to be in consolidation mode, where they've got to start figuring out what they're going to do with some of these young, talented pieces that they've acquired, because, you only have so many roster spots available at the end of the day?
Yeah, I don't think that the Thunder are at that stage yet. I do understand the worry of it, but this is only the second draft of the rebuild. And when you really break down the roster and you look past the age of these guys, Darius Bazley's a young guy on the roster. He has $4.2 million owed to him in 2022-23 season, but then he's a free agent. And then also, has he really shown you enough to want to keep him around. For me, I really like Darius Bazley, but it's not as though he's somebody that you can't move on from. Ty Jerome is in the same boat, $4 million this year, but then he's a free agent. And to me, Ty Jerome's just not shown enough to keep him around. So him being gone for this year is an easy roster spot to move on from. Favors is an expiring contract. Muscala is an expiring contract. Two veterans who the Thunder don't necessarily have to keep around. Eventually, you're going to find out before these end, you're going to know whether you want to keep Pokusevski around or not. I think that they're going to extend him whenever his contract's over after the 2023 season. But nonetheless, by that point, you're going to know if he's truly something to keep around. Other than that, you have Aaron Wiggins, who is a 55th overall pick and is on non-guaranteed deals. Avit Krejci, who was a second-round pick in 2020 draft, and he's on a non-guaranteed deal. Tell Malvon, I would not be surprised to see him not even on the roster come October. So these young guys are young in age, and if you keep them around, you can bank on their upside. But the only people who are indispensable on this roster is SGA, Josh Giddey, and then hopefully whoever you draft at 2 and 12 will also make it into that category. Trey Mann, Jeremiah Robinson, two long-term pieces for me, and also Lou Dort. But Isaiah Roby, guys like that just aren't there necessarily for the long-term fit for OKC. So they haven't, while they've amassed young talent, they haven't necessarily amassed talent who you just cannot part from. So that's kind of where the Thunder are at right now.
Is Chet Holmgren a lock for the Thunder at pick number 2? What are they going to do with pick number 12? Make a selection there, be aggressive in trading up in this year's NBA draft. Of course, you're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Thunder. Rylan, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks for having me.